All right. Thank you so much, Manuel, for coming over to the podcast again, round two. Really appreciate you taking the time today. And it's been, I think, more than a year since we last came in this forum. We did record a lot of it on audio the last time, and this time we want to do it more video. I think people also asked for it. And I think when I spoke to the community, they really enjoyed the last conversation that we both have. And I have been hearing people sharing that audio, but also reaching out and looking at the material, looking at the book. So it all comes down to amazing insights that you shared with the audience last time and also with your books along with Matthew. So thank you again for coming over to this program.
Thank you for having me and for inviting me again. I guess that means it wasn't too bad the first time around. No, I appreciate it. And as we were talking offline, appreciate spreading the word and just that more people can hear about team topologies and see if it's a good fit for them and maybe try out some of the ideas. So that's great. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Let's just dig into the stories and the content that I want to talk about today with you. Number one, I think first acknowledging the important part. I think the book has done amazingly well. I think you almost see streams of content on social media, but also in communities talking about adoption, about ideas from the book, and also in conference space as well. A lot of content around how organizations are looking at domain-driven design, but also dynamic teaming and team topologies all coming together, almost forming like set of a thriving ideas for organizations to come in and essentially go into the concept of building for fast flow. For you, particularly as an author, as you and Matthew coming together and forming this, how do you see since the time you wrote the book and now, how has been the reception in the community for you? What has been your observations so far taking this journey through the book?
Yeah, I think you touched on some really good points of what we're seeing. As team topologies, I would say, becomes another, in my mind, another piece of the ecosystem of ways of thinking and approaches that we should have in our toolbox effectively if we want healthy organizations and we want obviously to achieve fast flow. I think that idea of why team topologies, our focus, and I think it's pretty clear throughout the book and also the workbook that we published last year, that there is a specific purpose, which is to be able to achieve a fast flow of change, which is valuable to customers. And what does that entail, especially from organizational structures and organizational evolution and interactions between team. But looking at the big picture, if you like, yes, I think what we're seeing is where people derive even a lot more value is how do we combine team topologies, which helps us understand what types of teams and how they might be able to interact and actually, if you like, act as sensors in the organization to how do we need to evolve? What are the challenges we have? Where are the bottlenecks? Where are the dependencies that we need to address? That is something that is quite helpful by itself. But then when you look at, okay, if we need to change team structures, then maybe we're going to look at dynamic reteaming, perhaps to see how we can, and I'm a fan of the work from Heidi Haufland, who wrote the book. And so what are some of the patterns that we can use to do these changes in a, if you like, in a sustainable, in a responsible way, because we're talking about people in the teams, and you can't just, or you shouldn't just change things around without thinking of the impact on people. And the same for other areas, like you mentioned, domain-driven design, wordley mapping is also something that comes up. So I'm also a fan of the work of Susan Kaiser, who has been talking a lot within the DDD community, but also outside, about how to combine team topologies, domain-driven design, and wordley mapping. And other people have talked about combinations of techniques, some from team topologies with other domains. And I think that's where you see an increased value, and what I think modern organizations need to, and modern leaders, if you like, need to be looking at, versus kind of the more traditional, in a way, in an easier approach. And I don't mean this in I mean overly critical way. Obviously, it's not easy to adopt a large framework, but in the extent that it feels nice to have to think, oh, we can adopt this big framework and then everything will be better. And what tends to happen is that it's not true. Maybe some things will improve, other things maybe will get more difficult. And so my experience and what I see from successful adoption of team topology is that it's not just team topology, then combining with other approaches, so we can understand, what works for our organization versus, big frameworks that you tend to, some people might think this is all that we need, but actually you always need to do that thought process and that introspection and talking to your teams to see, okay, what works, what doesn't, kind of problems we have, and then figure out what's the next step, versus a big bang approach that, first of all, requires a lot of effort, tends to provoke a lot of change in the way people are working, all at the very quickly, which is not really helpful. And obviously team topologies promotes a much more continuous evolution of the organization.
Absolutely. I think also one of the things that has popped up is, I think what you have done with Matthew and the content around team topology is almost create this vocabulary that is kind of gives some of these concepts names which either had existed or brings these practices that perhaps people could not really form a naming around it. And now by naming it, by labeling these, it becomes almost part of the taxonomy of how teams operate. And I have seen in some organizations, when I speak to them, especially about applying team topologies, they almost, when they do reflection exercises or reviews for their teams, they almost talk about, okay, what are we doing facilitation? How much of facilitation are we doing? What are the expectations of facilitation? And I think those terms now become part of the vocabulary, the taxonomy in which teams almost diagnose their current state and talk about what they're missing, what additional things need to do. And I think this is also one of the big, I would say, additions that content and the work that you have done with MacU has been on the community, is just bringing these terms and the names together. And I think that has been also very valuably adapted in the community around that.
Yeah, I would say also, I think you're absolutely right. And a lot of people mentioned now we have shared language to talk about the problems that we have and the challenges and how to address them. Some people call team topologies kind of a language for creating operating models almost, which is nice, which means you can go to an organization and they've took ideas from team topologies. And so we're speaking the same language as in another organization, which speaks the same language, but then has a very different structure, and they both can work. And so in that sense, team topology is almost like a sort of meta approach to organizational structures and evolution. Is not something that prescribes you specifically which specific teams we need or interactions between teams, because like you said, that is something that needs to evolve and change as we detect or the teams themselves ideally detect what we need to do next. Do we need to collaborate to remove some dependency, or to work out together a solution to a common problem, or do we need to one team needs to facilitate another team to help them learn about some domain, or some could be a migration to microservices, whatever it is that where one team has more experience to share with the other team. And So that's all really quite interesting. And I think part of it's not just a shared language, is if you look at it, is this terminology now has sort of an expectation in terms of behaviors around this type of team. What do we expect from platform teams, which again is not something new, but now we've framed it in a way that I think makes it more clear how do we offer our services to the other teams? What should they expect from us? How do we develop new services or make changes? We need to collaborate with the teams that are the consumers of the platform, and so on. So I think that's quite nice to see that. Obviously, when we published the book, that was our hope that this would become adopted in this way, to help teams kind of basically figure out what do we need to do, what other teams do we need to interact with, in which ways, that in a much better, well-defined way, so that we're more effective and less frustration, and people feel more engaged with the work as well. And so, but obviously when we published the book, we were not sure if this was going to happen. So that's very nice. And I can also say, and connecting a bit to your previous question, the other thing we start to see is organizations applying ideas from team topologies outside of, let's say, the IT, outside of the more software-based products and services, which is obviously where the book was focused. And so that's another thing that's quite interesting. Maybe it's sort of still early days, but we see applications within healthcare. We see applications for legal teams. I have talked a fair amount, and I went to Norway to present for a consulting company in Norway, where they try to apply team topologies to the whole organization, where obviously they have consultants at the clients, but the legal team is sort of a platform team, and the finance team is maybe a mix of platform enabling and so on. And obviously it's not always definitely not perfect, and they are learning as they try to apply these ideas, what works, what doesn't. But there's something there which is kind of more broadly applicable, which was our feeling, me and Matthew, for a long time. But it's very nice to see actually in practice, without our intervention, that some organizations are looking to that, and that's something we expect to see more and more. And that's going to be very interesting to also share those stories with the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. While we are in this topic around feedback from community, I just want to add something also, what I'm hearing and I'm seeing in live. I'll share one anecdotal view, obviously applying team topologies in my teams and also the organizations that I talk to, is also how now hiring has been influenced by this. So especially like we are hiring for platform teams. So you're not just looking at a type of skill set you need relevant for the platform team in terms of just technical skills. You're also looking at based on the interaction mode, are there people coming in who can really, for example, get in the role of collaboration, get in the role of facilitation? How are they thinking about doing enablement? What are the ways that they can enable? Are they ready for the enablement? And I think what it almost helps is when you hire for such teams in applying team topologies, you also look at facets of what you're looking from interviewee candidates who are coming in, and also cater your interviewing process around that, which in past would have been, I would say, more fluffy or wishy-washy, because yes, a skill set that you are looking for a person, but now applying those interaction modes, you almost can map it to, hey, for this person to be really successful in this team, how can this person be a great facilitator? Do they show experience around that in their past roles? Because that's what we expect for this person to come in. How has been your observation around that, especially for maybe the companies that you talk to around hiring for such roles, especially companies who now fill in for the teams that are creating based upon team topologies?
Yeah, that's super interesting. And from a hiring perspective, I think what we were discussing before, having this shared language, and obviously as not every organization, of course, has looked into team topologies, but there's a larger and larger number of organizations that have some understanding of team topologies, some implementation. And so people who are changing between organizations, there's, like you were saying, this shared language also across organizations. Oh, were you part of a platform team? Well, how did you do how did you develop new services? How much did you collaborate in the sense of team topologies, or did you also do some facilitating for the stream aligned or product teams? And so that helps as well. And so that's quite interesting from the hiring aspect, to be able to have those kind of questions and that kind of assessment, if you like, not just from a technical perspective, but also from that perspective. I think you are probably kind of early adopter of this different view on hiring. I don't see a lot of organizations doing that yet, but I think it's starting to make more sense. And what's also interesting is other ways in which having this shared language influences. If you think about, for example, when we talk about the technical career, right? So this is a topic that often comes up again, like people who are really good technically, who are senior, and they don't want to go to management because it's just not something they're interested in. They don't think they would do a good job, because it's actually a very different skill set. But you still want to allow these people to progress in their career inside the organization. So, well, maybe if they are good mentors, maybe if they're part of an enabling team, or they work in a facilitating way, where the value and the knowledge that they have, it becomes even more valuable because it's shared with the rest of the or with other teams and other people, versus, well, I'm an expert and I'm the only person who can do this type of work. And so we also see a little bit of that starting, where, okay, maybe being part of an enabling team is actually seen as sort of helps progress in your career. And even other things, like for me, I've always thought about this, that yes, we're all, even if we're in a group. So even if we're talking about people with technical background, working in software delivery teams, that kind of thing, people have very different personality, right? So some people enjoy being in direct contact or very close to the customer, getting feedback. They thrive on that, and they want to improve. And so that's probably a really good fit for a stream-aligned team. Other people don't really like that so much. They kind of want to have the space to dig into the more technical aspects. And so in my mind, having the type of teams clear helps people sort of shift to the type of team that is a better fit for their personality. It doesn't mean that there's, because we cannot have type of team for each personality, but it kind of helps people sort of get it's like a magnet of the right people. If you have that flexibility inside the organization, which probably would be a good idea, that allow people to kind of shift and move towards the type of team that they feel more comfortable with because of the work they do. Obviously, there's always some expectations. Even if you're in the platform team, you need to collaborate with your other your peers, with internal teams that use the platform and so on. But there is to some extent, people might be able to fit into some kinds of teams better than others. And if we can promote that, I think we end up with a workforce that is more engaged, that feels more connected to the work that they're doing. That's something that in the past, in my experience, at least, as when I started as a developer and individual contributor, I didn't see anyone paying attention to this. They just assumption that, well, everyone, if you have this a technical background, then you can work in any team that's developing similar software with similar technology. But actually, the personality counts a lot, right? So that's also interesting. I think all these aspects of the work and of organizations are changing, in some faster than others. And yeah, so definitely the hiring might be changing some organizations, how we approach it, but also this other aspects as well.
I think it's a very interesting point, especially around like if you are bringing in people, and I think Hedy touches that in the dynamic reteaming book as well. Like, how do you map people to teams, especially when you want to create new teams or changing the teams, almost celebrating the change, is also advertising the interaction modes that is expected from people, and not everybody suits the type of interaction mode expected from a particular team. And I hear from you is almost giving an opportunity for people to not just understand that, okay, this is what the team is delivering and the skill set that they need to deliver, but also think about how closely do you associate yourself with the type of interaction modes that this team needs to have with other teams. And so for someone, that might be a development path that they can actually work towards and be a great enabler. And I think this is a fascinating idea also, just on a personal development point of view for teams to think about is there is a right set of people for each type of teams, and hence having the conversation, but also not just into the hiring process, but also when you move teams and change people across teams, is to really advertise the interaction modes more explicitly, because then that creates almost like an expectation that, okay, there are technical skills that I need to be able to perform in this setup, but also there is I need to resonate with their expectation on these interaction modes. How well I am associated with that particular interaction mode? Do I have inherent skills that map to that? Or most importantly, do I really want to work in that interaction mode? And that kind of decides how that person really becomes successful in that setup or not.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And for example, I had a conversation with someone working at a fairly large bank in Brazil, and it was quite fascinating. I had no involvement in this, how they were doing they started an enabling team focused on trying to help the development teams understand what are their needs, so that they could then help create support those teams by collaborating with the platform teams to create the services that would meet the needs of the development teams. But then he told me that they had an initial enabling team, and at some point, some people in that enabling team, they were all pretty senior, decided they wanted to move to the platform team because of what we were just saying. Like, they felt they were okay doing the enabling work for a period of time, but then they felt like, actually, I want to work on the services themselves. I want to provide a good service. And obviously collaborating with the teams as well, but they had that drive. And so I found that it was really matching with what we're saying, where people are attracted to the right environment and team for what they like to do. But you need also the organization to be open to that and flexible, and allow people to move as well, which is not always the case. And that's also part of the, let's say, the evolution of the teams is in a healthy way, is to expect that people are not going to be always in the same team. They might realize, oh, actually, now that I have more experience, I'm more senior, I want to help other people, or I actually want to be more in a platform team because that's the type of work I want to do. So that's quite interesting. It requires this kind of more open approach from an organizational perspective to allow this more fluid changes in teams and evolution, which like I said, is not always the case, but it's quite interesting. And yeah, I think we're touching on kind of effectively better ways of working and better adapting to some extent the organizational structures to also to the people that we have, or allowing them to fit better in the organization is really important.
Totally agree with that. Maybe putting the context around adoption stories that you're hearing around team topologies and how people are embracing it. Obviously, there are, as new ideas and practices becomes commonplace, often some teams overfit it and they just go completely on one extreme. And sometimes it becomes very hard for them to really embrace the inherent ideas around these topics. And they sometimes struggle with that and also learn from it. In that spirit, how has been things that you have observing in the community around teams and organizations who have not been able to really take the ideas in a way that you really intended to, especially around things which have not worked well, or you saw almost like a smell, or as a practice which has not really worked well? Can you share some anecdotal views that you have seen in communities around how team topologies have not been adopted really well?
Yeah, no, there are several stories that come to mind, and sometimes it's the way we try to implement the ideas, the principles, that in itself goes against the principles sometimes. For example, when we talk about the idea of a team API, right, in the book, where essentially teams to focus on their interface between quotes with other teams, make that clear, how we work, how we prefer to communicate, etc. And that can be quite valuable if the team themselves find it valuable, because then they will put in the work to make sure the team API is easy to discover, that it's up to date, etc. And so, for example, in some organizations, then the people who want to bring in team topologies and these ideas, and they start trying to almost force teams to adopt the team API, and we will do it in this format, in the wiki or in some document or whatever, and we're kind of like, okay, just wait a second. Is it really valuable if you are going to impose this on teams? They will not put in the effort. So there's a lot which has to come from the teams as well, because otherwise it's, again, one more thing that they need to do, but they don't feel engaged, right? And then the value is not there for the team or for the other team. So as with any kind of important transformation or change in ways of working, you want people to be engaged. So it's finding a balance between promoting these ideas, but then allowing those ideas to sort of germinate and become actually valuable for the teams. And that's often through, you tend to have early adopters, and then you show the value, and that starts to kind of spread. But if you try to like impose everything at once on all the teams, probably you're going to get a lot of pushback, and it's fair, because why should we from one day to another start doing something just because we are told to do it if we don't see the value? So that's one example. We also have seen several cases where, especially early adopters, when the book came out, 2019, late 2019, then 2020, sometimes, not intentionally, but in some organizations that were quick to try to direct their teams to adopt the 4 types of teams and interactions. And this provided value, clarity, more clarity on what kind of teams we have, what do they do. But then oftentimes they kind of struggle because they didn't kind of take a step back and, connecting to what we were discussing earlier, that it's not just team topology, it's also maybe we need to understand our value streams. whatever sort of techniques might be helpful, whether it's value stream mapping or you use domain-driven design techniques, but understanding the value streams, because if we don't have a good understanding of the value streams, then we might have what we might call stream-aligned teams. They're responsible for something end-to-end, but that thing is not in itself providing value, is not aligned to the actual value streams, because sometimes we didn't really clarify what are the value streams. So we have a lot of services and systems perhaps in place, but we don't really understand which customers are we serving, what value do those customers get from these systems, because things are sort of tangled together. So just calling stream-aligned teams and kind of splitting the monolith and saying this team takes care of this, this, and this helps a bit, but then you come up with other kind of struggles. And it's not always clear for these organizations, why are we struggling? Why can't we go faster if we now have streamlined teams, right? So those kind of things, which again are totally fairly normal and expected. And in my opinion, at least, it's better to start and get some value from applying the ideas that make sense for us now. And then if we come into other obstacles and we need to look at other ideas, I think that's perfectly acceptable, because the opposite is also sometimes an issue where we get into analysis paralysis. We want to get everything right. We want to have all the value streams right. We want to have all the team structures right. And so then, because that's really difficult and almost impossible to get everything right at once, then you're wasting time, and you won't get to, because this sort of transformations evolution is never a one-step change to something that's now perfect or much better. It's continuous evolution. So take small steps. That's what we always recommend organizations. Take small steps. Okay, try this idea, see which teams are engaged, try that first and learn from that, as in, agile and lean, like take small steps, learn from the feedback. Did this work? Did this help or not? And then we can do it, more of it or less of it.
That's a very relevant point. I think also there is no ideal state where you just say, let's get it right the first time and take maybe 1 year to get it right, because you need to generate value to your business, to your customers, while you're figuring out the right setup that you feel would be, set up for that fast flow that you want to have. So if I got your points correct, one that you're observing is around Teams API is just don't do it because you have to do it. See if it's really beneficial for you to keep building, maintaining, operating the Teams API for yourself. And then you have the right incentives to work on it. And the other mention that you have is, or also, let's say you're creating stream-aligned teams. If you don't understand what's your end customer, what's the value stream that you're affecting, then it becomes muddled. Then it becomes almost namesake for calling a stream-aligned teams, but there's no value stream clarity that you have for your areas of concern.
Yeah, those are two examples. And just to clarify on the Team API, by all means, it's good to make that available to teams and make it easy for teams to adopt Team API by having some useful internal templates or what have you. The issue is only when we impose that on the teams, right? Otherwise, definitely, and really someone in the organization, or either a team or maybe a group of teams, should be looking at these aspects, because like you said, teams still need to deliver. We still have the customers' expectations, and just running whatever services and products we have already. So typically we need to have some sort of, if you like, an enabling team. Some organizations have ways of working teams or groups, but we need some people who are looking at kind of across teams and trying to also to help teams adopt some of these ideas that might be helpful, like the team API or clarifying the interactions with other teams. Whatever it might be, obviously not just team topologies, or trying to help teams reduce work in progress, all these kind of things, where even with agile coaches sometimes are focused on at the team level, and someone probably needs to be looking at across teams what is happening, what kind of patterns do we see that, like you were mentioning before, that maybe we should be doing more facilitating, but people don't have the skills to teach and mentor. So we need to actually take a first step, which is helping people become better at mentoring and teaching, so that they can then share their knowledge. And so typically that's also something we've seen in as team topologies get more adoption, is at some scale, at least, we need to figure out who is going to be looking across teams and trying to promote, sometimes even just promoting the right conversations between teams, or between teams and with management, to understand what kind of changes do we need in the environment so teams can be more adaptable, this kind of things. And then the other, if you like, anti-pattern that we've seen that I just remembered is, because we talk about team cognitive load in the book, and we mention we need to be careful that the team has the responsibilities and the demand that fits their cognitive capacity. In some extreme cases, I would say, or maybe a misinterpretation that, okay, then the teams will just, okay, we only do, for example, the back-end development because we don't want to take on more cognitive load. And so they're like, I don't want to, we can't learn about UX, or we can't learn about testing or whatever, because that's going to increase our cognitive load. So that's kind of misinterpreting what we're saying, where what we're looking for is a balance, right? How do we manage cognitive load in the teams and in the organization, but still get teams to have ownership, end-to-end ownership of their services and understanding their customers? And that definitely needs multiple skills, and we need to figure out how we're going to get there. And there are parts of the journey where we're increasing our cognitive load because we need to be able to do certain things. And then afterwards, we can then look at how do we decrease this cognitive load, sometimes naturally, just by experience, because now we know how to do things and we have experience, and so that cognitive load goes down. Sometimes because we have a better idea of what kind of platform services are going to be helpful, and so we can then once, when they're available, that's going to reduce our cognitive load as well. But definitely just something I remember as that's not what we mean. We need to be careful about cognitive load and effectively manage cognitive load across teams in an effective way, by having teams focus more on their customers, on what is the germane part of their work.
I'm glad that we stayed on this anti-patterns, because that's a really good point that you mentioned about cognitive load. I have two maybe last points around learnings and stories on this that you're seeing, and then maybe as we close in, I want to talk a little bit about where we are going ahead. I mean, what are the ideas you're thinking about now, living and breathing and embracing team topologies as a creator for the last few years? But we'll get there in a moment. One point out of two with the last topics on this that I see also personally, but also people who have been applying these practices and embracing it, is how do you sell this internally to your stakeholders, to your senior leadership, especially around, I mean, the last few years have been also troubling, especially in tech organizations, with the news of layoff and team changes happening. There's a lot that is being asked. I think everybody's thinking about obviously fast flow and increasing the performance of teams. How do you see around organizations and leaders and individuals are working with their ecosystem from stakeholders and leaders who are expecting more? How are they able to, if I can call the word sell, that, hey, we need to move into this fast flow setup and reduce cognitive load, hence let's apply these practices and go slow? What have you seen working in that communication? What do you hope to see more around embracing it and making sure that there's an organizational alignment of embracing these activities?
Yeah, that's a really good and difficult question. And first of all, you need to understand your organization. There's not, I think, kind of generic selling point that we could apply. So we need to understand, okay, what does the organization do? What do we really provide and differentiate from other organizations, other companies? And the people who are leading the organization obviously are focused, or you expect they're focused on what value do you provide to our customers, and how can we be more profitable or be more helpful, and so on. So connecting that to, okay, what does it matter if teams are working with a clear mission? What does it matter if teams have clear interaction modes, and so on? That's the key, right? Making that connection. And so you can look at different metrics as well. There are, for example, the DORA metrics, or the accelerate metrics at the team level, that show, are we being able to deliver changes faster? Are we being able to have less downtime, or less being able to recover from problems faster, and so on? That's why those DORA metrics are quite important. And that should reflect in our ability to respond to the customer needs. So if you know, there's also the idea of business agility, right? So business agility fits quite well with the idea of let's say agility in the teams, technical agility, and the ability to quickly make changes according to what customers need and want from us. So I think that we start to see those kind of connections, but often in organizations there where you have more, let's say, of a gap between leadership understanding of these issues around team structures and interactions, so on, with the people who are on the teams, then you need to find those connections. Okay, if our goal as a business is to have more customers, or more repeat customers, or reduce churn, or we want to have enter some new markets, how does the flexibility in the teams and the capacity of the teams to go faster, how does it help? And you should be able to find that connection. But a lot of it is speaking the language that your organization leaders speak, and they might not always be talking about, oh, what type of team should we have, and how does the team API help? So we need to be able to speak their language as well, and explain, well, actually, to increase revenue in this value stream, we need to be able to move faster and run experiments and have clear sort of metrics. How do we know if we're getting more engagement, or we're getting more sales? And to some extent, there's a technical part of it as well, right? Being able to have fast, delivery pipelines or deployment pipelines, so we can get changes quickly, that we have the right governance on those pipelines as well, to make sure we have the right level of security, we have the right level of testing, etc. We have the right metrics when in our running systems to get feedback about how those systems are used. So there's a lot that we might need also to focus, to be able to then show how this provides value to the business leaders, if you like. But yeah, you need to start by understanding your organization, your business, and how do we then connect at the end of the day, I think it's clear for leaders that if we have teams that are more performant, that's why the high performing teams is such a clear kind of driver. I think everyone understands that if we have high performing teams, we'll be able to respond faster. But then you need to make those connections more specific, right?
I had a question about metrics, but I think you already covered a bit in that, and I'm quite mindful of your time. The last part, as we're concluding this conversation, Manuel, how are you thinking as an author, as an explorer, as I call it, in these looking at the adoptions? What's in your mind? What's cooking up in your mind now that you have seen team topologies in wild and how organizations are using it? What are the new ideas you are thinking in 2023 and beyond? Perhaps coming in a book somewhere new, but also what's going on? What things you're thinking about?
Yeah, so some things we've touched upon, others not. So first of all, there's a lot in my mind. One of the things that we're working on actually is to have better ways to measure team cognitive load. And so we've been running a prototype, and hopefully soon this will become a tool that teams can use to help them have a better idea of their cognitive load. And we've partnered with a company in the UK that has the kind of both the data science as well as the psychological view on what influences team cognitive load. So we think we have validated, we've gotten to a pretty good model of that that can, I think, can be a sort of game changer in the sense that this will allow teams to not only measure, so we don't measure the cognitive load directly, because that's, at least for now, is still impossible to say, oh, what is your cognitive capacity? How much are you using? These are, we don't have specific numbers, but we can measure the drivers, the things, the aspects of the work that tend to increase cognitive load. So that starts to get really interesting. And so, like I said, our goal is still in 2023 to have first MVP for that kind of tool. And then if teams can start to not just measure, but then, okay, if we identify some areas of the work that we should improve because they're causing us a lot of cognitive load that we would like to reduce, then we can take some initiatives. We can decide, we can try this. So the idea is that the tool will provide some recommendations, and then you take them, you look at your own context, obviously, and okay, what makes more sense for us? And maybe we try some things, and then maybe in 3 months or 6 months, we're going to run the assessment again and see if that has helped or not. So that's a very kind of scientific method sort of approach. We tried this hypothesis, we think this is going to help reduce this type of cognitive load, and then we check after some time if that was the case or not. So that I'm really excited about that. I think it has potential to be sort of game changer as well, as we gain more insights about what makes high performing teams, what helps reduce cognitive load, etc. Obviously, we're building on a body of work that already exists with the Accelerate and DORA metrics and all those things. So that's one thing. The other we mentioned earlier is starting to see some of the patterns in team topologies applied outside of kind of IT and software-based services. So we're looking at applying patterns in legal, in finance, and other industries like healthcare. We've seen it also in some marketing teams, and that's where there might be opportunity to have more content. Who knows? A book. It's kind of early days, but it's quite interesting to see what's happening there. There's another thing that for me is quite interesting. It's not something that I'm working directly on, but this idea of compliance and governance embedded in our platforms, or some people call it compliance as code. Essentially, as we're focusing on fast flow, we're starting to see, and many organizations see, that part of common bottleneck is around compliance. And so I think IT Revolution is publishing a book this year about also how do we get more kind of agile auditing as well around regulations, compliance, etc. So I think that's quite interesting. Obviously, from a team topology perspective, is the idea that we might actually be able to embed a lot of the compliance knowledge and the things we need to have in place into the kind of platform services that we provide. Probably a combination of enabling and platform, because you need to have teams, especially in certain industries that are very highly regulated. You need to have teams who are working on the products to have a reasonable understanding, not in-depth understanding, reasonable understanding of what are the limitations, what are the things we need to be careful about. So that's also something that I see more and more interest, but I'm not, let's say, as directly involved. I think people like John Willis, for example, have been talking about this, and I'm excited to see what comes next. Also with this book from IT Revolution, they also published papers around some of those ideas. So yeah, I think all of this helps us as an industry to be more performing, be more mindful of teams, of having people engaged, because at the end of the day, sort of, if you like, the ultimate goal for things like team topologies, that people, this might sound very simple, but it's that people feel more engaged. They feel happier about the work they do, that they feel like they have a clear purpose, and that's aligned with what they want to do, so that there's less frustration, less burnout, and yeah, if we can contribute to that, then that's quite nice.
Thank you so much, Manuel, for sharing that. And again, appreciate all the work that you've been doing to, thinking about these ideas, embracing it, and also practicing and also sharing with the community. Also, thank you again for taking the time to talk to me. Obviously, there's so much stuff that we can always talk about, but I really appreciate the time that you gave me. And I'm looking forward for all the exciting work that you're coming this year with, and talking more about the practices that will emerge from people in the industry applying these ideas. So looking forward for the metrics that you're looking at for Cognito. Very exciting work, and I'm personally also, as a consumer, this is very exciting to have someone like yourself thinking about this. And when it comes out, obviously we'll maybe doing round 3 and to you about this as well.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure. Very interesting conversations, and yeah, we'll have to do round 3, maybe in a year or so.
Thank you so much, Manuel. I appreciate that, and have a good rest of your evening and a good rest of your year.
Thank you. You too.